if you've never been lonely, you don't realise what it is like.
It feels as though you've been dumped in the deep end and there's nobody there to rescue you.
Well, you go hours and hours, never speak to anybody.
I don't think you'll ever get used to it. You know, it's always loneliness.
How do you measure loneliness when even trying to talk about it takes your breath away?
The room's just empty.
"91-year-old Margaret Nicholas has lived in this house virtually her whole life. First with her parents, then her husband and family. 2 years ago her husband died. Now it's just her.
We used to do the garden together, do our shopping together. Everything was done together.
But you obviously miss him.
I do.
Margaret's granddaughter takes her shopping and neighbours pop in to check she's okay. But it's everyday company she misses.
Some people would think me a bit odd, but I do chatter to my husband. I do it so I'm sort of, speaking.
That's the wife with a cousin.
Roy Croucher lives a short drive away. He and Margaret have loneliness in common. He lost his only son to cancer and then his wife of 50 years.
I'm always hoping that the wife will come through the door, which she never will. If you go out, you come back, and you come back to an empty house, and it's loneliness again. And you're always waiting for somebody to call.
Roy says he's lucky. A friend and her family see him most weeks. But like Margaret, some days the only voice he'll hear is a call from a phone befriending service run by volunteers.
Judy rings up on a Saturday night, because last Saturday she was the first person I spoke to all day.
And that's a long day.
It is a long day.
And how much difference has that made, that phone call that comes on Saturday night when you haven't spoken to anyone else all day?
Well, I always look forward to it. I always put that phone on that seat, ready to pick it up. And that's a great help.
The campaign to end loneliness says it should now be treated as a public health issue. Identifying the most vulnerable is critical, then offering support to cope with the bewildering and painful reality of ending up alone.
I've never been on my own ever before. No.
And so getting used to that has been hard.
It has. I don't think I'll ever get really used to it.
It's just something that is thrown at you. And you can't throw it back to anybody. You've got to just carry on.
So we'll start and jump right in. And this is session 2. Like we were saying last night, we had our first of 2 nights, and tonight is the final session with the training of our Being With Training volunteer training program. So it's wonderful to see everyone and have everyone on board. For those of you who are looking to join, if you have any problems, just let us know. We will connect you in. I'm just actually going to pop over the screen here so that way I can see what you're seeing there. Okay, great. So for a review of day 1 from yesterday, we have our human needs that we went over, and we started talking about how each of us has physical, mental, social, spiritual needs. And with those 4 areas, we include everything that may fall in those categories. So for physical, if someone wants to get outside, they want to participate in an activity, an excursion, something that, you know, is more physical, that's great. But we want to keep that in mind always, keeping in mind also how they are able to maximize their abilities, but also sometimes they may have certain disabilities too that are involved. So you want to be respectful of those and ensure that you don't you know, have an intention to, you know, maybe push someone beyond their limits, you know, and always take that into consideration. So that's really important. Making sure too, if perhaps if someone is in a wheelchair, for example, or using a wheelchair, that you want to ensure that you're very respectful with their property, and that is a part of them. So making sure that connection is made. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Mental needs, making sure the person is stimulated, things like that, and that conversation is engaged, it's positive, it's optimistic. It's really key here. And so socially, people are interacting with one another again these days, which is great. We have more opportunities to get together, so we want to take advantage of those. And that's something that you can implement in your proceedings with the Being With program. And spiritually, there's spiritual needs, which include religious observances for some people, but other times it may be more spiritual or philosophical and existential. And so we just have to make sure that we're respectful of all of that. And then as we move through that, we looked at visiting advice, what to do before your appointment, making sure you have certain protocols in place, especially now with COVID, keeping that in our minds before we start visiting and during. And also looking at things like, for example, preparing for your appointment, your meeting, bringing the tools that you need, a journal, keeping that handy, your badge, your ID, whatever you use. If you're part of a group, you want to keep all those things ready to go when you actually are going out to meet with them, confirming the meetings and making sure that entry, being with that person, and then following on that that exit is actually all a positive experience for both people, especially the person who you're interviewing and they're speaking with. And so we have, that was our, you know, kind of comprehensive. And then finally, we talked about My Story. Why does the My Story matter? And why do we do this program? And then we broke off and had some session of questions and answers, which was really great. And we got a lot of great feedback from that. So thank you everyone for participating. And then today we start on day 2, which is equally wonderful and exciting. So we're so happy to have everyone back today. So thank you all for joining us. And for those of you who want to join and, you know, you want to have, for example, an opportunity to redo this, or, you know, perhaps, you know, re-engage in this type of training, we will be offering this training again. So for you to contact us, let us know if you're interested in participating. We will actually send you information about that. For those of you who have, you know, you know, if you have the book with you, please do reflect on that. That's this one here. This is the training menu that we're going through today. And we're starting on chapter 4 right now, which is the second half of our session. So that's great. The first point that we want to mention is when we're talking and communicating with people with disabilities. This is a really important part, and it deals with communication, which is really key. So communicating with people, you know, we don't want to make decisions for others. So we want to ensure that when we speak to someone, we want to speak directly to that person, which is pretty much means that, you know, if there happens to be an interpreter in the room or someone else, a third party, and they want to engage in that conversation, that's great. But we want to ensure that we're always very respectful and mindful of the person we're actually speaking with, the person we've intended to be there for, and the person we are communicating directly to, the person we're, you know, surveying and actually interviewing. So we want to ensure that that person is able to hear us properly, especially if there may be a disability. You know, you want to ensure, for example, if they perhaps might be hard of hearing, if you're speaking through someone to that person and there's an interpreter or someone who might be actually relaying that information to them, you want to ensure that you're speaking to both people, but especially the person who you're meeting with, okay? If the person is interpreting and, you know, translating, for example, there's another language, you want to ensure you're speaking to them and you're being respectful to both members. And the next thing here is really to make sure that we're keeping in mind their abilities. So, for example, when we talk to someone, oftentimes we find if someone has a disability, we are actually going to be, you know, speaking to them. If they have, for example, a companion or aid or sign language interpreter, we want to direct our conversation to that individual directly. And with a disability, any type of negative language or disempowering words like victim or sufferer, we want to omit completely. Take that off from your vocabulary, okay, and choice of words, because that's not something we need to incorporate in any discussion at all. We want to ensure we're always positive, optimistic, and ensuring that we're speaking respectfully to that person. And always being sensitive, with a person, around physical contact. So if a person is, in a wheelchair, for example, or using a wheelchair, you want to ensure that you're respectful of that chair, especially. That's a key thing here. That chair is an extension of them. It's actually enabling them to be able to be mobile and move around, perhaps. So you don't want to overreach your presence, and especially you don't want to make them uncomfortable. So making sure that if you're asking to do something like move that wheelchair, you want to respectfully do so and actually ask them first. Be like, be it in saying, would I be able to please move this chair away, or something along those lines, simply because this is a part of them and it's their property and it's an extension of them. So you want to be respectful to them as much as possible. Making sure you're in a very nice environment. You want to make sure it's not loud, it's not nowhere obnoxious, that people are speaking loudly or maybe not really noticing others. So you want to be in a quiet area, something that's respectful to both, and especially that will help you in your interview and in your speaking with them. And the final line here, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is really key. And I think it's really encapsulates everything that we really want in terms of our intention of meeting and being with others. Thank you, Alex.
I was just going to say that the importance of this section is that a lot of people, when they get older, might acquire a disability. So they weren't someone with a disability throughout their lifetime, but some of them were obviously, but as they got older, they acquired a disability. So these same factors, of course, become very important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So when we're speaking to someone who happens to maybe have autism or be on the spectrum of autism disorders, we want to avoid using, for example, humor or sarcasm, certain figures of speech. Maybe that's something you want to avoid, colloquialisms. So for example, we understand something to mean a certain definition, but some people may not understand that. So that might be different for everyone. And that's something to keep in mind, especially when you're speaking, for example, and you're using short, simple sentences, it's always better. And it's much more effective, especially when someone might be on the spectrum, than trying to, draw things out or be more elaborate. Being aware of also how people understand you. So for example, some people love to talk, other people may want to be more short and to the point. So if that's the case, you want to ensure that you have just as simple dialogue as possible, and ensuring that the messaging is most effective, okay? When you're speaking, for example, to a person who may not know what you want to do, you want to use closed-ended questions. So would you like to go to the park today? And you ask them that first, and then once, depending on their their response, you'll say and further that with, wonderful, let's get your jacket or your shoes or whatnot. Would you like to grab a drink before we go? So then you're just following on simple ideas and simple closed-ended questions. Be aware, especially here, of body language when someone is speaking. We want to ensure that if they're standoffish and they don't really want to go anywhere, they're going to be more closed, and they'll probably end up doing something like this, or they're not happy, or they're not pleased with, where we're going. So, take that as a hint and just maybe say, maybe we should stay indoors today. Maybe perhaps you'd prefer to just watch a movie or listen to music or who knows what. Look at the garden, you can always do different things, and then just be aware of that, because words speak volumes compared to what people may actually say in audibly speaking to you. Being flexible in our wording, for example, oftentimes we might be in contact with someone who is elderly, and some people may interpret that, or may in their minds feel that they should be able to speak to them in a way that's very simplified, almost like a child. And it's that point that we mentioned yesterday with Alex. He was bringing that up, that, for example, speaking down to someone. And we don't ever want to do that. So we want to make sure you're actually always people, bringing people up and being optimistic and hopeful, and especially speaking to them as an adult always. And when you're visiting someone, for example, who has had a stroke, that's something especially to keep in mind too. People might experience things like aphasia after a stroke, or, you never know. So they have a challenge with speech, and you want to ensure that you're very respectful, because they do understand, they comprehend exactly what you're talking about, but they may not be able to voice that back to you. So it's really key to do that now, and to ensure that you are respectful of that and in your tone. And using flexible words, for example, like may instead of not, would be much more effective, especially with that certain type of person, because simply, if you say something that may be upsetting to them, saying something in a more flexible way, and actually a little bit softening of that language, will actually enable them to appreciate maybe that tone more so than if you're being more definitive, for example, in using words like not, or let's end this, or finish that, or being a little bit more on the bold side of the language term. Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say, I have a son, Peter, who's autistic. He's 27. And this whole thing about being aware of body language, and the point is that he can't really read your body language. He's different than us, or most of us, in that sense. He doesn't really read these things. And the other thing is, he's very literal. So I'm not saying that, because the thing about autism is a spectrum. So, it all does range. But I mean, he's right in that, fairly autistic section of that spectrum. Anyway, he's very literal. So the whole thing about, using hyperbole just doesn't go over very well. It just doesn't work very well with him. I was just thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. So, and I appreciate that so much, Alex. And I do value that people oftentimes may not voice this to us. So if someone, for example, looks uncomfortable, and they simply might give you that an idea and an understanding that they do not want to continue and go forward with something, please take that as that sign that they don't want to proceed. So it's really important. Thank you. This point here, especially when we're speaking about people with chronic medical conditions, oftentimes they might they may actually share with you their own conditions and their medical background. So when you are speaking and you're gathering that information, or if you're noting it for yourself, just so you have an understanding, make sure to remain calm, use an unhurried tone, because that might actually be a little bit more upsetting for them. And if there's something that they need immediately, definitely ask them that. So for example, if they have a heart issue, or if they have, high blood pressure or something like that, you want to make sure that you were so supportive of what they may need or require. If they happen to have a chronic condition that comes up while you're visiting with them, make sure you can access the support and know how to access it in the event that something may occur, because you are with them, and then you are definitely especially responsible. So you want to ensure that you are excuse me, having just a full understanding of what is involved when you're with them. Tell them, especially when you're with them, if they need support and they need something to be done by you, tell them exactly what you're doing before you do it, because that is something that will come into fact. And after the fact, you want to ensure that they understood exactly why you were doing that, and why it's important to make sure that they understand what you're doing. Okay, so just be very explicit, open with what you're doing and your intentions. Okay. Thank you. In terms of people with hearing difficulties, this is a big one. When I personally sometimes feel I have a hearing difficulty, my husband bought this tool the other day where it's like you have a little camera and a little like almost like a zoom that you can look into your own ear and see what's going on inside. And this was really disturbing to me, because I've never looked inside my ear, or anybody's ear for that matter. It's a funny thing, we all got ear infections next week, so I don't recommend buying these tools. But the point is, we all checked ourselves out. We seem to have clean ears, but you never know. And the point is here, it's a joke, but hearing is a bit of a sensitive topic for some, because they may feel that they're not being heard, or maybe you're not actually hearing or listening effectively. So we want to ensure that if you can't hear them, you are able to tell them, communicate them how you can hear, if you are hearing certain things that, come in, if you're, let's say, on Zoom like this, and you're having trouble connecting and your audio is not working and you want to show them that, you just make sure that you're more overt and you're actually more obvious with your signaling, and you're able to communicate that effectively to them. And then just being, versatile with technology, especially maybe Zoom is not the best functioning software to use at the moment. Maybe you want to join in on something like WhatsApp or something else, and you want to pivot slightly in the middle of your meeting. So then you want to communicate that to them, and you can write that either in the chat or doing something else. So you just want to be flexible when you're approaching this. Hearing also is really good to know if, for example, they have an interpreter. You want to make sure that you're maintaining eye contact with that person if they happen to be deaf, and making sure you're rephrasing things. The person may not understand necessarily everything, so you want to ensure that you're getting acknowledged on what they do understand, so you can kind of continue and buffer and move around the conversation based on that. And then in terms of them, if you are receptive of what they're hearing, of what they're telling you, then you want to respond and relay that to them. And you can say things like rephrasing sentences. What I'm understanding from you, what you're saying is that it's really important for you to feel appreciated, right? And you can just rephrase certain sentences and they will actually know that you're hearing them and you're listening properly and you can all understand each other. Sometimes when you are speaking to someone and you happen to be in front of a light source, so for example, where this sign over here says compassionate community care, there's a light source right above here. Maybe when you're looking, and if you're sitting in front of me, that light source will be beating right in front of you, which will make it really difficult for you to see my face, which means then it's harder for you to maybe see what I'm saying. So, and communication is affected. So some people might need to read lips. That's something to keep in mind. So when you're visiting with someone, maybe not sitting in front of a light source is a better idea. For example, a window, you might want to move away so that there's no glare, and something may not obscure your face and make it difficult for the person who is perhaps hard of hearing or has to speech read. And obviously, we want to ensure that when you're speaking to someone, you want to face the person you're speaking to and you're talking to them directly. And, you don't want to sit in a place that makes it hard for them to hear or see you. When someone who have hearing loss, they actually will look at your lips. And it's difficult these days now because a lot of people are using masks oftentimes. So it's hard to see and understand what they're saying. You may ask them to lower their masks, or if you can't really understand anything, that might become a bit of an issue. You might look or reach for a visor instead if that's what they're comfortable and you're comfortable with. But by all means, definitely let them know what you do here and what you understand. Definitely avoiding chewing gum or obscuring your mouth with anything is important, and also speaking with your hand in front of your mouth. My dad often will say to me, don't speak so loud, because I speak really loud. But then he'll say, I can't hear you. So then I'll raise my voice and he says, stop yelling. So it's a bit of a joke, but anyways, the point is we want to speak clearly and we want to be effectual, and we want to ensure that we are being heard and we can be heard to the person too. Yeah.
So depending on who it is, my cousin,
Yes.
who's only a few years older than me, is a person who's deaf from birth. And so whenever I would ever bump into her, she always had a pad of paper with her. So she would, speak to people like that. And that's just what she did. And that's what she enjoyed. The funny thing is now, because of all the computer work I do, I can't really write anymore. But anyway, but that's how she was. She would always just write things down. And you could see how that's how she communicated, and that worked for her.
Yes, exactly. That's great. Thank you, Alex, for sharing. So then speaking with someone who has maybe a learning disability, again, for example, people may not necessarily have a learning disability later in life. They might have had it all their lives, but if they're older, sometimes what happens is they may have encountered, as they get older, they might have, for example, a stroke and a condition that evolved into having what appears as a learning disability. So they may have acquired one type of learning disability, but that's because of event of a medical condition. And so it's really important that we show people things. And so we're very visual, and oftentimes when we meet with people, and sometimes, when they can't hear you perhaps, or they're not quite sure what you're referring to, you can actually point it out to them and say, this is the page, or this is the question that I'm asking you. You can bring, a notepad with you, for example, and a paper and, a clipboard, and just say, write out the words, what you want to say to them or what you're referring to. And if you say you want to go outside, then you draw an arrow, or something. You're becoming more visual these days, and that's helpful. We want to ensure that when we speak to someone, we use short, clear, direct sentences. This is something that's, always effective. I don't think it's, always, overstated, that we can just be very simple and people understand, and that's the best way. When you need to, you obviously can rephrase certain information, and you can, use different words that you think might understand or help that person understand what you're saying. Using visual aids like I just did with this, using your phone or a tablet or any kind of advice that, device that you have that can help. You can bring up videos, or you can bring up visuals that you have, pictures that you have with you, or you can point out pictures they have in their room. That's actually really effective. People will respond and they'll enjoy that even more, and ensure that you are able to comprehend what one another is saying. And the last thing is providing opportunities to answer questions. So definitely have them answer questions as much as possible, and really directing that conversation so they feel fulfilled on what they're sharing with you. Thank you. In terms of a person with a mental illness, often we may not know that a person has a mental illness, and this is becoming more and more common these days. I find when we meet with people, and I notice this myself, if I sit down with someone and I notice, there might be a little bit of an understanding of reality in a different sense, or something is impacting that person in that dialogue, and they might feel bothered or distracted, that might come up. Otherwise, you may not necessarily notice it. So it's really hard to know if they have or happen to have a mental illness. Always remain calm and don't assume, don't diagnose a person before they can actually tell you about themselves, or they don't need to tell you, and you simply just continue and resume, the normal, conversation, however something happens or whatever occurs. Making sure the person can speak is key here. If a person shows signs of being agitated, maybe angry, or have anxiety, panic, or fear, they might become disoriented or aggressive. You want to remain calm, obviously, and you want to make time for them to show what's happening. Be courteous, showing that you care and you're empathetic to what's happening is really important here, and that we can understand that we appreciate what's happening to them is something that's their own reality. It's not your reality in the moment, but it is their reality. So we want to accept that, understand it, and again, using short, clear sentences to help them understand what's happening. So for example, we can say, we may not agree with what is being said. For example, but we can say things like, I understand that you are feeling frustrated. And that brings them back and zeroes in on what they actually are experiencing and what that means to them. And we can also accept that the hallucination, if it is a hallucination, delusion, they might be real for that person with a disability, but don't pretend that they're actually happening to you, or that they're real to you. If you need support, definitely go, obtain that support if you need it, or if you want to talk to someone that might be able to help you and assist you in that regard, do so. And then always tell them what you're doing. Be very open and honest with what your intentions are, so that they can help move through that experience with you. Okay. In terms of someone with a mobility issue, people might have needs that are related to their mobility. So this is, for example, the scenario of a person who uses a wheelchair, rather than wording it as someone who is confined to a wheelchair. Again, these are words that we don't want to ever use. Things like, for example, wheelchair bound is another one that is an older way of speaking, but we don't want to draw that up and actually ever reflect like that when you're speaking to a person or understanding it. That wheelchair, that's a device, and they are using that wheelchair to help them actually enable them to move and get around and participate in society. So it's actually a liberating device, and it's a liberating tool for them. So we want to especially respect and honor that, and don't feel or think that it's confining, because it's actually not, oftentimes in their own minds especially. So we want to always regard it in a very positive manner. We definitely, if you're sitting down, you want to sit at their level. So, if there's a chair, if there's a bed, opt for the chair so you can be just as close to their level, especially as possible. And then, of course, you want to be aware of their limits. So if a chair is allowing them to reach to a certain extent, if something is out of their reach, then you want to maybe ask them if you can help them go pick that up, and you bring that forward and you bring it towards them. And don't ever push or touch a person's wheelchair. It's a part of their personal space, right? So, if they need something, by all means say, oh, would you like me to move this chair for you or your chair for you? And ask them and make sure that they're all right with that before you actually go ahead and proceed. Okay. Wonderful. Anyone, when we speak with people, oftentimes we hear of people who have speech difficulties. The one thing that we want to ensure here is that you don't assume that they can't understand you. And oftentimes they may not vocally speak how you would speak, or assume that they know how given their disability, maybe they're not able to voice themselves. So sometimes, you just have to be patient. Often you don't want to interrupt, you don't want to assume, and you don't want to hasten the experience by trying to just kind of bulldoze over certain questions. You want to ensure that they understand you. You can use tools again. You can write things down again, like Alex was saying. He has a cousin who may use tools like writing, for example. This is really key here too with speech as well. I think it's important to have that tool. So definitely bring a clipboard, piece of paper, notepad with you is really great. It's a great idea. And using short, questions that require short answers are really good. And that way people understand what you're relaying to them, but also they feel heard. And that's really key here. Being attentive, making sure that you're there for them. You're taking your time and you're, enabling them to speak as much or as little as they want is really key. Being genuine, that's the best part of this. Don't pretend to understand them. If you can't hear them, you don't understand them, you want to maybe say, excuse me, can you please repeat that, and make note of that. And then be open to different ways of communicating. Drawing, writing, showing something with your hands is really important. Picking up a picture, that's great. And giving them your full attention no matter what is really important. And sometimes they may need to write something down. Great, let them and help them to do that. And that's the best way to kind of move forward. All right. And then the final point here, when we're talking about disabilities, people with visual difficulties, oftentimes we want to ensure that you're identifying yourself. And this is really important. And this hits a bit of a personal note as well. My husband has a visual impairment, and it's a degenerative condition that affects the macular part of their eye, macular degeneration, and it's early onset. So it actually leads to blindness. And so he's legally blind. But the point of that is we want to ensure that a person with a visual difficulty knows who you are. And so oftentimes we will see this where my husband can see things that are very much blown up. So for text, everything has to be 400 through 300-400 times bigger. And that's oftentimes we see that with people with visual difficulties. And identifying yourself is really important, because if this is the first time you're meeting, you definitely want to ensure that they know who you are, you state who you are, and you have your badge so they know it's credible that you're there for them. And if they happen to have an aid dog, you want to always make sure you are actually walking on the opposite side of the dog, and don't touch the dog. The dog is there for them. It's like a wheelchair in that regard. It's a tool. It's an effective tool that they will prefer to have with them. And that's part of what they need. So don't interact with the dog, and don't be on the side with the dog. Let the dog take care of them on the other side. Okay. That's not there for us. And then if you're ever doing something, I find it's really helpful to describe what we're doing before we engage or do something. So for example, if you're going to move something, especially this is key for me, I notice this, that if I move something out of its place for my husband, he does not appreciate that. Because he's used to certain things being where they were left. And just because I think a book deserves to be with the other books doesn't mean it should be there. All right, enough sarcasm. So the point here is just simply, ensuring that people know where they are. I have never seen things as organized as I have with people who happen to have visual difficulties. Some things are really always intentionally put in their place because they know that they're going to look for them later if they're not. So being respectful of that is really key here. the worst thing you want to do is actually move things that they need, like their ID or their purse or their wallet or something that's important to them, and then they can't find it, and then you left, and then there's a whole, search going on that happens unnecessarily after you've left. So, it makes sense to you, may not make sense to them. Definitely tell them what you're doing before you do anything. Giving specific non-visual instruction or information is really key. If you happen to be with them and, for example, we're going out for a walk, I'll often mention to my husband, hey, look at that beautiful sunset, the colors, they're really beautiful, or this is happening over in that corner, there's a beautiful old, Cadillac driving by. You draw on the things that you're seeing in beauty, in nature, that's actually bringing hope to that person. And you want to have them share in that regard. So that's really nice, I find, and oftentimes very appreciated for a person who has maybe a visual difficulty. And the next thing where we talk here about, for example, if someone happens to be actually completely blind, if they happen to be eating with you and you're sharing a meal and there's a garnish or something that's not edible on their plate, then definitely please let them know that and just ensure that they're aware of what's going on. So if there's a plate that has, let's say, a garnish at the front of it, closest to you, you can say, oh, there's a garnish there if you need to. It's at the 12 o'clock point. You can actually let them know that so they have an understanding of what it is. And just always ask them before you do anything. Offer to read too if they want you to read something. Again, this is larger print, size 14-16, the book that we have. We intentionally did that for anyone who might have a visual impairment, but there actually often is bigger fonts that people will appreciate. And so for my husband or anyone like that, I will often print things in much larger font so that they can read it very clearly. And we can offer to read things. So that's really great. They appreciate that. And using that larger print is something that's really handy. And oftentimes too, people as they age, their vision will change. So maybe someone who is, not fully blind may just simply appreciate, watching something up close, moving the chairs closer to the table with the TV on it might be something you might consider doing. And these are just small things, but they mean a lot to people. And people may not understand it until you realize that, oh yeah, that person may have a visual difficulty and they may not want to share it. You just assume and you go and you follow their lead. Okay. So that I hope is very helpful. And we're going to jump to the next chapter in our next segment. Thank you
I
all.
was just going to say that the lawyer I work with, Hugh Scher, when he was 16, he had a brain tumor. And because of that, he's deaf on the one side, he's blind on the one side of his body, right? Because that's when they did the surgery to remove the brain tumor, it affected the one side of his brain. And so, it's important when you know him, because I know him, I always sort of make sure I sit on one side of him. But, he's one who's sort of forward enough that he will say to you, well, please sit on this side. He can't see you. He can barely hear you otherwise. So that's what he's doing. And it's a sort of an important thing in that way. If you think about how someone lives with their disability. Now I guess it doesn't want to switch.
Thank you.
Switch. There it goes. Beautiful. Advocacy at the doctor's office. Now, I'll say right at the bat, I'm going to introduce this right at the bat. We've developed an advocacy program that will be available. Hopefully, we'll start doing training for the advocacy program in the fall. Advocacy is not for everybody, but it is a very important thing to be doing. And I'm going to get into this in a second. So the whole idea of advocacy is when somebody has a disability or they become significantly elderly or they have significant health problems, it is important to have somebody with them when they visit a doctor or they go and do important business. And the reason isn't anything other than the fact that having significant community leads to them being treated better. And I can get into that further. Also, if someone is, we're going to go into that. People have, they might need an advocate if they've got trouble stating their feelings about their physical pain, if they're afraid to speak out, if they have a lack of understanding, or they may be too ill to speak up. I'm also thinking of someone who's got some early dementia, so they're having a hard time expressing themselves. And so what happens is they might be going to, as an example, they're visiting the doctor and they're having a very hard time expressing themselves. But if you've been visiting this person regularly and you've agreed to be their advocate, you would then say, well, so-and-so has been experiencing this and this and this, and then they'll agree with you. They'll say, yes, that's exactly what I've been experiencing. So you're helping that person receive the care they need. That I think is very important. The biggest thing that I'll get into this further, a person who can help that person, well, you need to stand up for their rights. The person who is the best type of advocate is one who is capable of being polite and assertive. And I speak about that very clearly. Why do you have to be polite and assertive? Well, when you're going to a doctor's office, as an example, you can't upset the doctor, nurse, etc., because you're being so assertive or so difficult that they want nothing to do with you, because that doesn't help out the person you're an advocate for. Yet at the same time, if the doctor is suggesting something which you know the person who you're with has no interest in, then you have to be also assertive. So there's a nice balance here of being very polite, very kind. You know, I get calls all the time. I'll tell you right, I get calls all the time to the emergency line, etc. And people are calling me about medical issues, etc. And they'll be saying, you know, my wife's in the hospital and this is what's happening. And the doctor is really urging for this. And my wife doesn't want that. What am I to do? The first thing I say to them is, don't get angry. Don't ever raise your voice. Don't get very upset with them or anything like that. Be very kind, because sometimes when someone is too aggressive, they get kicked out of the hospital. So that's the first thing you do. The second thing you do is you stand, you speak very clearly, and you say, no, that's not what she wants. That's not what she wants. She wants this. These are her values. This is what she believes in. So you obtain and you're maintaining opportunities for that person. You're gaining access to support and services. So you're making contact, you're helping them obtain the services. So obviously, let's say someone has a health problem and you're talking to the doctor about possible home care, etc. Now, in that case, they would need a doctor's letter explaining that yes, they would qualify for, let's say, whatever they can get in home care. It's very little actually in Ontario. Every province is a little bit different. Every state in the US is a little different. I know in Ontario, it's actually almost ridiculously the little amount of home care that's being offered, considering the advantages to home care, keeping people out of nursing homes, etc., and in their homes. Anyway, helping them gain these supports and services. Talk with the healthcare providers. Now, remember, an advocate is only there because the person has agreed for you to be there, meaning that the person you're representing has agreed. We have an advocacy agreement in the booklet that you could have them sign. The second thing is that you are only representing that person. You're not representing yourself. So obviously speaking, you have to discuss things ahead of time, and everything you're talking with that person about is completely and totally confidential, because it's not about you, it's about that person, right? Anyway, when we talk with healthcare providers, I always point out that it's not that healthcare providers are terrible people or anything like that. It's just that they're often very busy. So let's say your person who you're advocating for is in their late 80s and they have significant minor health problems, and the doctor's thinking, how can I help that person? They're just saying, oh, well, we can give you some analgesics, you know, some painkillers or something. Well, it's possible this person actually has something, such as, who knows, they have some back pain that's actually caused by something, and it's important to sort of advocate for them, saying, well, you know, she actually hasn't had this problem very long. She probably could use a couple tests. You know, there should be some sort of MRI or whatever, be a scan of some sort, because this pain hasn't been going on very long. I think it's not what you're thinking, and you're sort of, I was just say, standing up for that person. Now, why is that necessary? Because once again, the doctor is they're trained to solve problems. And sometimes when you come in and you're very elderly, it appears that there's nothing to solve. They're looking at you as if but you are looking at this person as your friend. You understand them differently, right? You're advocating for them. How to be a good advocate? Well, you have to be a good communicator. You have to be willing to be a good communicator. So this isn't for everybody. If you're not willing to be, you know, stand up and speak and do things, you have to ask questions. So sometimes it's uncomfortable. You might be at a doctor's office with somebody and the doctor is talking about different things. You might have to ask questions and say, well, can you tell me more information about this? Why is that important? Well, because you're gaining information not for you, but for the person you're advocating for, right? You need to be a good listener. So, you know, you're listening to everything they're saying, you're trying to take it in. And this could be very important because the person you're advocating for might have some early dementia. Now, I'm not talking like they're they're full blown or anything, but they have some cognitive issues going on with their age, etc. And you need to be aware of this to make sure that you're gaining that information to help the person you're advocating for. You want to be courteous and respectful. I can't emphasize that enough. Even if it kills you, you need to be doing that, and you need to be assertive, right? So this is the mixture. It's very, very, very important. It's very important that you're sharing these points of view, because what you're doing is you're advocating for a person. So when you're doing this, you must first arrange consent with that person. You can't advocate for somebody if they've not approved of you. You can't just show up places and say, oh, by the way, I'll be there at 1 o'clock to give you a ride to the doctor, and I'm just going to go in there with you. You can't do that. Not to say that that may not be helpful in some circumstances. It's not right, right? You have to have an agreement in place. And so what happens is it's good to discuss expectations first with the person you're going to represent. And this is important because they might, this might take a bit of discussion and time, etc. You must be willing to be comfortable. You must have willingness and to be comfortable with being an advocate. And somebody who is not comfortable with that should not be an advocate, even if they have knowledge of this person. They might be somewhat helpful, but sometimes it gets into a very difficult place. They need written permission, and they should complete the patient advocate agreement, which is at the back of the section in the, it's in the booklet, and I can actually find it here. It's patients have, the agreement is on page 95 in the booklet, okay? It's important to have the agreement in place, to have it signed, so then actually you have a legal right to be there. And I think that's very important, to have a legal right to be there, okay? The advocate talks with the person. So what are we doing? We're helping to support them. So we talk with them first. We find out what's actually going on. We find out concerns, because you're acting on behalf of them and their instructions. So as an example, let's say they are having, give you an example, they're having pain in their shoulder and it's new pain, or they're having pain in their back and it's new pain, or they're having problems with their legs and it's a new problem. These are important things to identify. Where is the problem? What's happening? Because it's possible when you go to the doctor with this person, they may not remember exactly what they've talked about, but at the same time you remember, and you can say, well, actually, they're having real problems with fluid retention right now in their legs, and they have they have different things happening, etc. They act as if they are, okay, so the health proxy, they act as if they're unable to communicate. A healthcare directive and advanced directive for living will is important, but healthcare proxy is different in this case. An advocate is different than a healthcare proxy. Now, let me explain this. A healthcare proxy is making decisions for you when you are unable to make medical decisions for yourself, whereas an advocate is working with you while you are capable of making medical decisions for yourself. So as an example, you might appoint your son or your daughter or a good friend as your healthcare proxy, but they're not your advocate. They may be your advocate, but they might not be your advocate. As you're advocating for someone, they might actually ask you to become their healthcare proxy, and that's another legal document. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition does sell such a legal document called the Life Protecting Power of Attorney for Personal Care. We only charge $10 for it, so we're not bankrupting anybody, but it's maybe the best $10 anybody can invest, because obviously it is designed to protect you. Before the visit, you have to write down the information and make sure it's all right. You need to know the time of the day of the meeting. You need to gather information. You should bring a list of medicines. I think this is very important. There's a lot of people who have a whole list of medicines that they take, such as Kathy's mother, and and it's possible, just possible, that that's not being reviewed regularly. I'm not talking about Kathy's mother. I'm sure it's being reviewed all the time, but that's not the point. It's possible it's not being reviewed regularly, and it could be someone's health condition is actually related to interaction of medications that should not be happening. You inform the doctor's office of your role. They should know when you're coming there that you are an advocate, that you have been legally allowed to be an advocate, and you must be prepared to be there if there's a delay. It's not uncommon to show up at the doctor's office for a 1 o'clock appointment and not get in until 3 or 4. I'm sorry, it is the reality. Kathy's got a smile on her face because she knows exactly that. She's got 4 kids at home, and she's probably experiencing that quite often. Anyway, I experienced that too in my life. So we must be prepared if there's a delay. What do we need to accomplish? This is a big question. You need to, figure out before you go to the physician's appointment as an advocate, what needs to be accomplished. What are the person's concerns? As I said, you must talk to them ahead of time, so you know clearly what are the concerns. What are the person's medications? You can ask questions. Here's the list of medications they take, and is there any possible side effects that are going on here that's causing problems for the person I'm advocating for? Maybe they're drowsy and tired all the time now, and that could be related to the medications. There's might be new symptoms to discuss, new issues, new problems, and and it's important that you know what they are. How do you talk with a doctor about sensitive issues? These are important questions. You have to talk to the person you're advocating for first, and then you would then be interacting with the doctor. Often you don't actually talk so much with the doctor because sometimes your presence is enough support. Sometimes it's just that you recognize, and I'll give you examples. So let's say you're someone who's become quite old now, and your health is reasonably good. I always say it's good to have a friend or an advocate with you. Now, especially if you have a disability, that's even more so. And the reason is as I say, the physician or the nurse isn't a bad person, but they don't know you. And they're seeing somebody coming in who's quite old or has a disability. They might be making human judgments. It's not that they're terrible people. We're all human and we all make judgments. I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm just saying it's the reality. You are that person's advocate. You are their friend. You are then also being with them. You are seen as a part of their significant community. It makes that person more important because you're with them. Keep a notebook or a journal. Why is this important? Well, obviously speaking, if you want to talk to the physician, etc., about what's happening, you need to know what's happening. But on top of it, if the doctor's saying, I think you have this problem or that problem, or we did a couple tests and this is what it came up with, it's important to write that down because the person you're with, as I say, might have some cognitive issues, might not exactly remember, might not know exactly what's going on completely, and it's good to know. Now, remember, when we're talking about notebooks and journals, these are completely confidential things, okay? These cannot be shared with anybody. You might be writing down the notes, but you don't own those notes. As the advocate, it's the person you're advocating for who those notes apply to, right? It's not about you, okay? Record keeping is very particular if you're talking about healthcare needs, and you should keep a little folder of written responses and things you might want to, if you're communicating back and forth with your advocate, the person you're advocating for about medical issues. And as this says again, this information is confidential. There is no other point to this, and it cannot be shared with others. There's just no way that you can ever share it with others. So during the visit, you take notes, you respect the person's privacy, you ask questions. As I say, if the physician or the nurse practitioner is saying X, Y, and Z, and you're not 100% sure what it means, and the person you're advocating for might not know exactly what is being said, you ask questions. Don't be intimidated. Never be intimidated. These are human beings. Of course, you have to be totally respectful. I'm saying that again, but don't be intimidated. Suggest they provide answers. Absolutely. Inquire about services, as I say, maybe home care services, other things, other services that might exist, and ask for information sheets. Today you go to a doctor's office and, Mr. Google might have given you a whole bunch of information sheets ahead of time, but, doctors have information sheets. And sometimes it's important to ask for that. Make follow-up appointments. So if the doctor is saying that I'd like to see you again in 30 days, you're advocating, so you're with your person you're advocating for, you make sure there's an appointment in 30 days. You've helped them fill any prescriptions. I'm not saying that you're doing it yourself. No, you're helping them fill their prescriptions and discuss the appointment with the person. So afterwards, it's good to discuss it. And if the doctor has said we're concerned about A, B, and C, it's good to say, well, the doctor said this and that. We need, has suggested this. So it's important to have those discussions. As an advocate, you are invaluable in helping make the world a better place for those in need, right? You're helping that person. I don't want to reiterate enough, but I get a lot of calls, and there's a lot of people who could really use an advocate more than ever before. With the aging population, we have to understand let me break it down even a better way. This will make total sense if nothing has made total sense yet. If you're a person with a disability, your life experiences, people don't fully understand you, and people may not be providing the best medical care for you, not because they're terrible people, but because they have made judgment calls, etc. This is the experience. People with disabilities talk about this all the time, that they have to argue just to receive the basic care that they deserve. So as an advocate, you're recognizing that this happens outside of the direct disability community also, and you're helping that person. So the advocate's code of conduct: I will practice with compassion and respect for the person with whom I work. My primary commitments are to promote the person's health, safety, and rights of that person. I will be transparent in my work with the person. I will maintain privacy on behalf of the person and keep confidential all activities and records. Now, this is unless speaking with my supervisor for advice. Now, in this case, if you actually are working in a church community, as an example, you might be working, as I say, with a pastoral minister or somebody else who's involved with the visiting, and there might be some serious issue. Now, remember, everything's confidential, but there's certain things you might share to help make sure that person's receiving the help they need, right? I will guide and assist the person in medical decision making, but at no time will I make decisions about health or medical care or medical services on their behalf. Now, if you actually their power of attorney and they become incapable of making medical decisions for themselves, then obviously that would be different. I will respect the person's values and belief system as the foundation for their decision making. And here we go. So that's advocacy. We have a program coming out. We will be promoting it very soon and be offering advocacy training. I think advocacy is one of the things in the next many years that if we want to help protect our own people who share our values, we're going to need to get heavily involved with advocacy because they might need it. Elder abuse. Well, I'm not saying that you're going to see elder abuse. I'm not saying when you're visiting somebody that elder abuse is going to become a prevalent issue. But what I am saying is elder abuse has become common, right? I am saying that the stats show that there's a serious problem. And I recognize that you might bump into elder abuse and you might have to somehow deal with this question. And so it's important that we talk about it and we're aware about it. So, elder abuse, what are the signs of elder abuse? Well, sores or injuries. Well, obviously someone might have fallen, but obviously we're looking at consistency, right? That there's multiple sores and injuries that are continuing, things happen. I think also abuse is neglect. So there might be neglect issues. Vague or implausible reasons for the injury. Not seeking care for an injury. If someone doesn't seek care for an injury, it's highly likely there's elder abuse involved. And why is that? Because most often elder abuse is done by either a family member or a close friend. That's most often related to elder abuse, family members or close friends. And they're not wanting to report the injury, it's probably because it was done by someone close to them and they don't want to lose that relationship. They are messy and unclean in appearance. Now, that might be just that they're messy and unclean, or it could be that there's abuse going on. Malnutrition and weight loss. They're not eating properly. Sometimes they're not eating properly. Why? Because they used to have money. They were fairly successful in life, but now they have nothing. Why do they have nothing? Because their good son has taken it all, begged from them. Then they get their check once a month or whatever they're getting from the government, or let's say they had a job and they're getting, a supplemental check, from a former employment place. And every month the son or the daughter or whoever is coming around and begging half that money out of them, and they have nothing. Dehydration is a sign of abuse. Remember, dehydration is actually worse than starvation. Why? You can die of dehydration so much quicker. Starvation, even me as a runner, and my weight's not so high anymore. I lost quite a few pounds running. I've been running for quite a few years now. Even me with my low weight can go a long time without dying of starvation. Okay, they're afraid of someone. You might come close to them and they react. Well, that's because somebody else has done something to them. Okay. Financial fraud. This is most common. This is the big thing now, whether we like it or not. A lot of people are experiencing financial fraud, exploitation, sadly, sexual abuse. Physical abuse is an act of violence that may result in pain, injury, impairment, or disease. Neglect is the failure to provide the goods or services necessary for functioning or to avoid harm. A lot of times we've been reading these articles about what happened to people during the COVID crisis. There was a lot of neglect that happened, and there was deaths from neglect. Some of that was related to the fact that there was such a shutdown that providing the care for people wasn't happening. To me, we can understand maybe the reaction of the shutdown, but the neglect we should never have allowed to occur. That should never have happened. Physical abuse, sadly, you notice physical abuse because it's consistent. That's the problem with you meet somebody and they have some problem and you think, oh, that's too bad. Hopefully you'll feel better soon. And then you come back and there's something else happen the next time and the next time and the next time. Elder abuse, a doctor or other healthcare provider has not been notified. That's a big sign of elder abuse, as already mentioned earlier. They have infection, a smelly or a dirty wound. Why is this important? That's neglect. They're not willing to take care of the wound. They're not willing to go get treatment. In the case of infection, they're not willing to get it cleaned out, etc. Why? Because it resulted from abuse, therefore they're not getting treatment. The person has not received any medical care. Now, it could be that they have some dementia going on. That's true, and that could be that. Then there's a signs of neglect. These would be signs of neglect, right? Most common injuries: bruises, pressure sores, fractures. Very common. This is the most common type of physical abuse that you'll see with the injuries. Okay. So a superficial injury that involves the outer layer of the skin. These are the most common, okay? These abrasions are caused by movement of the skin over a rough surface. So someone's grabbed them, right? They've grabbed them, and then they have that, the abrasion or the bruising going on in their arm or their neck or something. It's somewhere. Usually, it's a place that they can grab on. Someone can grab onto. It's evidence of both a physical abuse or neglect. Neglect would also refer to a nursing home where they're not being properly cared for. Sadly, there are some people who do these kind of things in nursing homes. The problem is, my mother-in-law was in a nursing home for a few years before she passed away, and this wasn't physical abuse that she experienced, but one of the women who had been working at that home in her section was not returning her clothes, was taking things. She'd come in, and if you had given her a box of chocolates, my mother-in-law, if we gave her a box of chocolates, she'd say, "Oh, you have chocolates," and she'd just start taking them, and she would move things, and she caused all these problems. And I don't know why maybe she was doing it to several of these ladies. Now I say ladies because in a nursing home, yes, there were men there, but it was predominantly ladies. Let's be honest, it's nothing personal. It's just the reality. There's more ladies there than men because us guys, we tend to die first. Anyway, it's the truth. Anyway, the fact of it is my mother-in-law did nothing about it because she was afraid that there would be greater problems if she complained about it. And my wife was just talking to her one day, and she's saying, well, what's up with she was saying to my wife, can you pick up some clothes for me? And my Susan said, well, what's up and everything. Oh, well, it's not being returned to me. I'm really getting low on clothing. And it's like, what do you mean it's not being returned to you? Well, I put it in the laundry and it doesn't come back. And then she started talking about a few other little things. So then my wife complained about this particular woman, and my mother-in-law never saw her again. So obviously the nursing home either had a complaint before or took that complaint pretty darn seriously. My mother-in-law never saw that lady again. And then that was the end of the problem. Obviously, that's lesser so than bruises, physical abuse, etc. We know of, sadly, there's been stories on the news where somebody in the family saw some bruises and that on their family members, and then they put in, a hidden camera and they caught this stuff happening. That's horrific that this has happened. Sadly, some people do these things. But most often abuse happens actually within the family or friends, and that is sadly the reality. Bruises happen when a blood vessel ruptures and blood escapes into the surrounding tissue. So you're getting a bruise going on. So often this is something that's quite evident in abuse. You may suggest, it may suggest the cause of the injury, like the bruise itself might suggest that it was clearly, a grabbing of someone, a hitting, that kind of thing. Common locations are of non-accidental injuries are in the face and the neck, right? These would be common locations of a non-accidental injury. Burns result from tissue being exposed to heat above 50 degrees Celsius, and they're categorized by the effect on the surface area, and it's affected also by how deep the damage is. Facts are persons over the age of 65 have doubled the national death rate due to burns, and people over 75 have tripled the rate, and people over 85 have quadrupled the rate. Now, one of the reasons would be that if you're 55 and you have a serious burn, you're more likely to recover, and your body might, is more likely to recover. That's one of the reasons why the death rate would be much lower below the age of 65. As we get older, our bodies don't heal as well. Nonetheless, abuse becomes prevalent, and a burn has very serious effects upon an older person, especially with their ability to heal. Okay. Fractures occur when an external force is greater than the strength of the bone that's applied. So they could have broken parts, broken body parts, etc. And older people are more susceptible because their bones are weaker as we get older, especially, if they've had bone disease, but I mean, injuries, etc. But if you've, let's say, had some health conditions, somebody who's had cancer, they might have recovered from cancer, but cancer is, for instance, a disease that very much affects one's bone density, etc. And there's other things that affect bone density. But as we get older, we're more susceptible to these injuries. And so when someone's experiencing abuse, it's not uncommon that they've had this type of an injury. Common sites would be a hip and a wrist. Elderly people are at risk of spontaneous fractures also in the case of abuse or even non-abuse. As I say, it's difficult because it's hard to know if you've not known someone very long or you haven't visited them too often to recognize if it's abuse, and you wouldn't want to be sort of jumping all over something that wasn't really a reality. But when you start actually visiting someone regularly and you're noticing that there's something prevalent here, then obviously these are the signs that you can't remain silent about it, right? You can't remain silent ever about abuse. Result of blunt force, lacerations, right? The result of a blunt force characterized by the full thickness or the splitting of the skin. Once again, this is common in physical abuse, and it can occur also in neglect. And once again, when we get older, we do not heal as quick, so there might be signs that there have been multiple injuries over time, and you might have different scars, etc., that are showing it because of the healing. So obviously these become signs of abuse that we can notice. Pressure sores. Now, pressure sores could also be from neglect, and I think that pressure sores are absolutely a serious problem in our medical community because we're not properly caring for people. Some of that might be because there's not enough, how would you say, a nursing aid that's involved. Let's say a nursing home that isn't providing enough aid for people who are in their beds regularly, so they need to be turned, they need to have proper care to avoid these bed sores, right? But inadequate blood supply to maintain proper circulation of tissues results in pressure sores. And the standard of care for a pressure sore is what? Prevention. Obviously a pressure sore is a problem because if it's once you have it, then it has to be treated right away, because if it gets worse and worse and worse, people can die from a pressure sore. On top of it, they might get infections, etc., that cause serious health problems. When you get infections from the pressure sore, that can be very painful. You start hearing of all these health problems that start accumulating for somebody, and the best case in pressure sores is prevention, and that provides proper care. So somebody has a say who's now, let's say they have lost the ability to walk. Well, now they're going to be in a bed more often. Well, then we have to make sure that they have proper care. If you put them into a wheelchair to move them around, they can't just sort of sit there all day and leave them. You can't leave them in their dirty diapers. So for instance, if they have a diaper, all these things might result in a pressure sore. So as I say, the best way to prevent, the best care for a pressure sore is what? Prevention. That doesn't happen. It's too bad that it becomes more and more common, but that to me is a real sign of neglect. A really good care prevents these kind of things from happening. Abuse and neglect occurs when a person is restrained in a non-critical situation. So we understand that there might be a need at some time to restrain somebody. We have taken the position very clearly that we do not support the concept of restraints. Not to say that it's not never, ever, ever necessary, but if you're visiting someone and they're restrained all the time, that is a serious problem. Now, either the person has got serious issues and the staff of that home that they would be in, or that location, feels that there's no other way, or it's neglect. They've decided that we don't have the staff to properly care for you, so we're just going to restrain you. But the problem with restraints is it leads to significant health problems. We should not, and also it dehumanizes the person. We can understand that someone has significant cognitive issues. They might have whatever, you can start describing these things, but we want to treat everyone as a human being. Restraints are not a human thing to do, okay? And so we recognize that in some circumstances, it might be seen like a critical situation where it might be seen as necessary. Now, of course, I'm the one who's also admitted to you ahead of time, I'm not into nursing homes. It might be necessary, but it should be a last a last thing that we do. We should be keeping people in our communities. Restraint is strongly associated with increased injury and death and may result in worsening behaviors, not improving behaviors. And sites other than the arms or legs or multiple tears and abrasions should raise suspicion. You're seeing it regularly, it should be raising suspicion. Skin tears here heal without scarring, so sometimes it's an invisible crime, but if you're seeing this regularly, sometimes you might have to ask them the question, and they're not willing to answer the question because you're talking about a family member, etc. So maybe you have to get around a bit and say, why have you seen, have you seen your son so-and-so lately? Have you seen, because how it's difficult. These are such difficult situations, and I'm not saying you're ever going to bump into this, but what I am saying is if it does happen, you can't be silent. There is no way we can be silent about elder abuse. Malnutrition, it's often a marker of neglect. We know that, as I say, during the COVID crisis, that there's a lot of people who experienced malnutrition. It became sadly too common in nursing homes. A lot of that was based on the fact that they had no staff to properly care for people. At least that's how they claimed it to be. But there's also issues around how you care for someone, because sometimes we're not recognizing the cultural food preferences of someone. So they're bringing food to someone that they have no interest in. So how do you deal with this? Well, this is to me a form of neglect, and we're recognizing there might be issues of not enough staff. That's become a serious issue. Certainly, staff aren't paid enough. If you are someone's in a nursing home, one of the most serious issues is the fact that they might be short on staff. Improper feeding techniques. Well, improper feeding techniques, there are techniques to feed people, okay? And so I know a lot of people who contact us because they might have had a mother or a father who had some eating issues. And I got calls like this sadly regularly during the COVID crisis because people were denied entry to nursing homes and they were denied entry to hospitals. And they were so angry, they were wanting to contact lawyers and everything because they were the ones going in every day to feed their mom, right? Mom is not eating normally anymore because of her cognitive condition or because of whatever. And they would sit there for an hour every day or more, making sure that mom had proper nutrition and spending time with them. And now they were locked out. This is ridiculous what happened. And I know I can understand it. Don't get me wrong. I understand we're trying to protect people from a disease. I get it. I don't get the fact that if you have people that need to be fed and you're denying them that ability to be fed, how this would make any sense. But that's just me. Maybe I'm too innocent for my own good. I don't know. Or maybe I'm too jaded. Dehydration, signs and symptoms, confusion, sleepiness. They'll say, oh, well, someone's become like confused all the time. I think they must have their dementia is really getting worse. Well, maybe it's because they're dehydrated. Maybe they're not receiving proper hydration. My mouth is really dry. I need some proper hydration. But it will go a step further. They become confused. They're not responding normally anymore. Why? Because of dehydration. Dehydration does lead to that. There's other risk factors with dehydration. That's medications. You get a decreased absorption. So if the body doesn't have a certain fluid level, obviously when you're taking medications for certain conditions, the body has to be capable of properly absorbing those medications, right? And so when you have a problem of dehydration, then you also often will have a problem with the medication someone's taken. There's a natural level of dehydration for elderly people already. Let me explain that people who, when they become older, they have their body has less desire for fluid. Maybe it's because well, there's lots of reasons for it. The body changes. It changes hormonally, it changes physically, but also our activity level may change too. So the body's not desiring as much fluid. So there's also a different level of hydration right off the bat when someone's getting older. People with dementia may not recognize that they are being abused. This is the problem when you're dealing with someone with dementia. They just might not recognize it. They may not be able to report the abuse or talk about it. And even if they do report it, they may not be believed. That's just Miss So-and-so, and she's not really with it anymore. Doesn't make the crime any less important. Self-neglect accompanies dementia and mental health. Self-neglect is a serious problem also, and it makes victims more vulnerable. So we become dependent on others when we become vulnerable. We can become very dependent on others. And if that other is becoming or is an abuser, this is a serious problem. You might get a situation where somebody, was very successful in life, and throughout their life, they might have had a few of their kids who became sort of dependent on them, meaning they always uh, they always spent more money than they could ever make, and they always were demanding money from that parent because the parent had money. And now it comes when they get older and the money's dried up, and so now you have this situation where the person is dependent on this relationship with their children, because that's their interconnectedness, that's their family, right? They have a relationship, and yet at the same time that relationship has become abusive on the part of their children. Abuse or neglect leads to depression, which in turn leads to self-neglect. People feel depressed, they get down about it. Why? Because obviously speaking, this is most often done by a family member or a friend, and they often blame themselves. Alcohol abuse, 5% of older persons have alcohol abuse. Now that might change depending on whatever community you're in, or whatever, how would you say, um, differences might be amongst certain types of people from different communities, right? It's more common in men than women, and it takes lower levels to feel ill effects, meaning as you get older, you need less alcohol to feel the effects and to experience that problem with it. Financial abuse. Well, this has become the crime of the 21st century. You might have heard of a lot of friends who've been abused financially. My mother's gone through financial abuse. I know many other people who've experienced financial abuse. I mentioned, of course, to you about issues where someone might have done very well in their life and they were always happy to help their children out. And as they got older, the abuse got worse until they had nothing. You know, financial abuse is a serious situation. Sometimes people believe that they're actually helping someone. They get this fake phone call where they're told it's their granddaughter who's stuck in Sri Lanka and needs $10,000 right now, and they actually believe it. And the scheme was so well developed that they were convinced that it was their granddaughter who was stuck in Sri Lanka, and they sent $10,000. Before you know it, then they're asked, "Oh, well, we got someone here on the line." Now they're after 20,000, and it goes like that. And you actually think you're helping somebody. Well, what's happened is that they've recognized that you've got someone who's lonely, who has some money, and they're taking advantage of them. Okay. Compassionate community care. Donations to compassionate community care. Kathy might want to talk about this. She's right now muted, Kathy, so she can't talk about it, but she can unmute
Thank you so
herself.
much. Thank you. Yes, so for everyone that's interested in supporting Compassion Community Care and work like events, hosting events like this, having these wonderful webinars that we offer for free to everyone and anyone that's interested, we could actually do specific groups as well. So we can cater these events and have them specialized and geared, centered on certain groups and in their focus as well. So we offer this free of charge, and we offer these great books as well that have already been printed, and we can send to you, mail them to you as well, and the workbook as well, and of course the training manual. It's all thanks to the support of our donors. So definitely, if you are so inclined to, please consider making a donation to support our work, and so that more of these events can happen. We definitely value your support and your generosity and your financial backing. Some groups want to opt to have, for example, a group sponsor and or donate every month. So we have donors that show their support monthly, quarterly, annually, whichever works for you, and we take PayPal and over the phone donations as well. If you call the number here, that's actually the helpline number, but I can put it in the chat and offer that information for our actual office to come through. And because we are a registered Canadian charity, we will send back a donation receipt to you for any donation. So please definitely consider doing a donation if you can, as they are great ways to have a tax rebate as well. Okay. And thank you again for your support in advance. Thank you, Alex.
I think I really scared Louise, and I didn't mean to. I just put something in the chat about that I didn't really mean to scare her. I'm not saying this happens to everyone. I did put down that I do strong, and I said yesterday, I do strongly believe in community care. The whole concept of compassionate community care is that we care for people in our communities. I'm a strong. The whole vision of this whole thing is that we're far more likely to be receiving proper care if we're among those who know us, who have some history with us, who have community with us, There is more respect for me if I'm in my community because I have a place, I have a purpose, I have meaning. Let me give you a prime example, a very prime example. In the mighty metropolis of Glencoe, which is of course the funniest comment I can make, because there's no mighty metropolis of Glencoe. Anyway, the barber who is in his early 90s just recently retired. And this is a man who started cutting hair when he was 18. And now he's, I think he's 93, and he just retired. And his dad ran the barber shop before him. So I remember getting my hair cut there. And now remember, he didn't have to keep cutting hair until his 90s. He didn't need the money. But the fact of it is he would talk about, yes, yeah, I started working for my dad when I was 18. I started cutting hair. And his dad had already been working for like 40 years or 45 years already, like was already like 45 years old or so when he started there. And so you get this whole thing of the position, the point in the community. So even when this man now has retired, everyone knows who Mr. Webster is. I talked to you yesterday about the lady across the street. She lived in Glencoe all of her life, and she lived in her home. She lived with her husband. When her husband passed away, she was still there, and she had a purpose. She had meaning. She had a place. If you can provide, when she needed care, if you can provide home care for her, it provides a place of importance where we don't lose track of somebody, we don't forget who they are, and we know that they are a place, a person who used to be a teacher, who had children, who has community, is important to us. I really believe in that in a huge way, and I think when we get away from that, we make big mistakes. So a lot of us say, well, I can't care for so-and-so anymore. That is a reality. I understand. I'm not saying that. But if you're capable of living on your own in your community, you should do so. It makes a lot of sense. It makes an awful lot of sense. And it also helps us maintain our place in the community. So that's my point of view. And if you disagree, that's okay. I'm not opposed to have someone arguing with me. I've been argued with lots of times in life, and it's okay. There might be some questions here. So we will go to the chat. Okay, a couple people have left. That's fine. You'll be sent an email with the information about these presentations. You also then receive updates for future presentations. So if you know of someone who should be part of it, if you're wanting to start a compassionate community care service in a church community, we're willing to provide more training. So for instance, I know Vicky's connected to a whole pile of Anglican churches, and it's possible they might want to see this as a central mission. Not to say that they're not visiting people already, but the fact of it is we can always use more visiting in all these communities, especially if you consider the fact that you have to understand what we've done here with our compassionate community care training. There's nothing new here. You notice we didn't invent any wheels. What we did is we put together a program that was based on what anybody would recognize as this is important knowledge to have. Maybe in some cases it's too much information, but really you should know about the elder abuse and things like that. I hope you never bump into elder abuse, but you might. It's good to have some training and information about it first. Nonetheless, it was not to reinvent a wheel, but it was to give you lots of good information and to help you visit. The fact of it is this used to be something that we just did regularly. I always talk about the fact that my mom has always done this. When my mom was younger, she always visited the hospital. She received no training. It started when she was much younger, and the our local parish priest would say, Mary, so-and-so's in the hospital. I think you have a chance to go visit them. And she went off and did that. And she just kept on doing that. She used to visit the nursing homes all the time. That's just what she did. And she just continued to do that. She visited the hospital so often. This is what's sort of interesting about it, that in the local hospital in Woodstock, when they put together this committee, after they legalized euthanasia, they put together a committee, and they wanted to know who from the, how would you say, the ministry team should be invited to that committee to talk about euthanasia, assisted suicide made. They thought, Mary's here all the time. So they invited her to the committee. This is the kind of thing, not because she was a minister or anything like that. It's because she was visiting so often. She just did that. And so the fact of it is what was once seen as normal is now become the less than normal, and it should be the normal part of what we do, right? It should be something that we just naturally do. But in 2022, you need some training. We provide training. Why? Because you can't have people visiting without being first given a lot of information and recognizing the importance of things that we better look out for and help people with. Those who choose to be advocates will receive training also, and then hopefully they will be an excellent advocate. Yeah, we have the helpline, and thanks for putting that information down. That's the information. Thank you, Evelyn. Are there any other questions? If someone want to ask a question, they can put their hand up or they can unmute themselves. We have a little bit of time. If we leave early, I don't think it'll bother anybody because they've been here 2 nights.
Oh, Allison?
Hi, Kathy and Alex. Thank you so much. It's really informative. I've learned a few new things as well. So thank you so much. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
We can hear you perfectly. Yes.
Perfect.
I wanted to also add, in terms of showing somebody their value, also kind of to acknowledge, how much we can learn from them.
Yes.
Because especially when we're different generations too, there's so much wisdom, and maybe acknowledging that as we're, it's like, oh, I learned something new, or how do I do that, or I never knew that, sort of, because we have so much to gain from this exchange as well.
Well, sharing amongst the generations is absolutely important, Allison, but it's also the importance of the My Story program. It's important to know what happened in the past. Okay? You didn't actually have to mute yourself, but I think it's very important to know what happened in the past in our communities, those people around us, because we should be proud of our past, and we should be moving forward, and we should be respecting what happened in the past. And I think that's very, very important. And the My Story does that. I know that Christina had her hand up second, so we're not ignoring Candace, but Christina did have her hand up second.
Thank you, Alex. I really enjoyed the 2 nights. I just wanted to go back and ask you again, the name of the document that you mentioned you sold for $10. That was to do with, could you just repeat that?
The Life Protecting Power of Attorney for Personal Care. So if you want a copy of that, I'll put in the chat my email address. You can contact me at info@epcc.ca. epcc.ca. We have a document that's basically Canada-wide, and we've got one specifically for British Columbia, because British Columbia has different rules around power of attorney documents, right? The legal documents. So I don't know. Do you live in Ontario, Christina?
I'm in Ontario, yes.
So you would have the Ontario document. We only charge $10 for it, and it's designed, as I say, for you then to appoint someone to make medical decisions for yourself when you're incapable of doing so for yourself, but it also is designed to protect you. So the language of the document is everything. It's like anything. The language of the document is everything. Because I'll give you an example. If you put in your document, and it's a normal thing to say that if I were in such and such a medical condition, I would want no further treatment, only comfort care. Well, it's an interesting statement. But if you don't realize that food and fluids have now been defined as medical treatment, you're not realizing you might be causing serious problems for yourself at the time when you need food and fluids, because you've put in the document this, and then someone has to interpret it. I also say about power of attorney documents, don't appoint, if you're doing your will, for instance, you often appoint your oldest daughter or your oldest son, etc., or a close family member to be the person who's the executor of your will, etc. And people will often then also appoint the same person for their power of attorney for finances and healthcare. But I disagree with that. I tell people, don't appoint someone to be your power of attorney for healthcare unless they share your values. So if your oldest son or oldest daughter do not share your values, do not appoint them to make decisions for you for your healthcare. Because remember, the law says the document is only legally in place when you can't make decisions for yourself. So you don't want somebody, as much as you love them, you don't want someone making decisions for you who does not share your values, right? You just don't. So if it's your youngest daughter or your youngest son, or if it's the lady down the street from you who you've known for 30 years who shares your values, that's who you appoint for making medical decisions for yourself, because you want to make sure that those are the decisions that are made when you need those decisions to be made. So you might have another question. Anyway, you can email me at info@epcc.ca. I'm happy to send it to you, and it's only a $10 plus taxes, $10.50 is what it costs, and I'm happy to send it to you. You can put your hand down, Christina. We're gonna go to Candace next, because I saw her hand up, and then we're just going down the list.
I just wanted to thank both of you for this wonderful experience. I was once a federal prison inmate. I'm now a proud member of the Catholic Women's League. It's changed my life, and I'm gonna cry, but it's people like you who keep me going and keep me on the right path. And I just want to thank you.
Well, all I can say, Candace, I'm happy that you are with us. I'm very happy because
you.
your experiences could actually be incredibly helpful to other people. So thank
Yes.
you. Now, I believe Allison is next, and then I'm going to Christine.
Thank you for sharing, Candace.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you guys, you may have addressed this in the first session. I missed a little bit of the first session. I was running behind from another engagement, but what are your thoughts on sort of that language of burden? Because it always bothered me when
Yeah.
it always bothers me actually when somebody says, "Oh, I'm such a burden," and I always feel you're not a burden. Like, why would you ever think you're a burden? And I
Right.
always feel like, you know, we're able to exercise our charity because of you. Like, we're able to grow in love because of you. You give us an opportunity to grow. And but yeah, how do you sort of, what are some ways that you?
So Kathy, you should comment. Yeah.
Sure, I can provide a really immediate example, just because I know a lot of people in their later life may get really down and depressed. Their lives have changed significantly since they were younger. And I noticed this even in my own immediate circle with a relative who, as she got older and is now in her later life, actually confided to me and said to me, you know, Kathy, I don't see a purpose in living. Some days my husband is really hard on me, and can be quite abusive, or what she thinks is abusive. So for her, you know, it gets nitpicking. It gets at, you know, every day's, you know, they don't have social outings. They maybe not be as social as they used to be. So people start to kind of become more insulated, and that can really drive people nuts. And just having people at home nowadays, I've noticed there's been a huge up intake or increase of people who are in couples, or, you know, like there's couples who living together are together, and because of COVID have been really isolated and cut off from everyone else. And then they start kind of fighting in between each other because they're just driving each other nuts, and they're always with each other, and there's really nothing else to do, that they feel like they're not accomplished, they're not being productive. Maybe, you know, they might be in retirement and there's no opportunity anymore to do more things. So people really become, you know, they start feeling like they are a burden. And so when I spoke to this individual, I actually had to draw light into that situation. I said, listen, this is a timing situation, that you are always together, you're kind of batting each other. And because oftentimes men need to go out, they want to be productive, and they get angry at themselves if they're not, you know, they start to look towards one another to have issues. And then so this person said, you know, I feel like I'm a burden, that I'm speaking even to you right now. I said, you're never a burden. You know, there's healing in the sharing. So by just sharing and venting to other people, you're actually going to start lifting the load off of your own shoulders, and you can actually start helping yourself out of this. And it's a tunnel vision. They think that's all they have, is that one other person, or they have no one else. And I reminded this person, you have grandchildren. You have beautiful grandchildren. You have babies that are looking up to you, that they're going to call on you as they get older. They're going to want to see you more even. They know who you already are, and they want to see you already. So you need to start to, you know, be positive and be a light for those people. And that's where what Alex said yesterday and today has become so important. And I'm actually going to write it across in big letters on my, you know, in front of me on my wall, because, you know, interconnectedness is huge these days. You know, people have literally been divided and segregated, and it's just become like, here's a line and that's it, you're there and we're here. And if, you know, whatever happens, people think that it's normal. It's not normal to put ourselves in these boxes where we don't socialize and we just kind of cut out everyone. So the burden idea becomes really strong for people who've just been cut out of social circles, and they're not really interconnected anymore. And that's a big one. And the burden is really more of how they feel about themselves. They don't know what a burden means. They don't know what people are capable of, that we are able to, you know, handle our own lives. I have 4 kids. I have 4 kids actually under 4. So 4, 3, 2, and a newborn. So, you know, I can handle that. I can handle my parents. I can handle my step parents. I can handle, you know, work. You know, we're able to handle more than we realize. And if someone feels like they're a burden, you just say, well, that's just one more thing that, you know, you can add to the list, because everyone can be a burden, right? And I hope that helps a little bit. Maybe Alex, you could shed some light too on that.
Well, the purpose of the program is fits in exactly with what Allison said, because a lot of people do feel that their life has lost meaning, purpose, etc. And they do feel like a burden, and they don't want to be a burden on others, etc. But you see, the purpose for visiting somebody is that you're sharing something of yourself with others. You're sharing your hope, your meaning, your purpose. And it's not also about, you know, we often think about this, and we think about, oh, well, you know, you should. Well, it's hard sometimes for some people because they've become so ingrained in the culture has shifted, and they might just be a very lonely person alone. Like the video I showed at the beginning of this, the older woman says, I'll never get used to this. I spent all the time for years with my husband, and now he's passed away. And so you're thinking, that would be very difficult. Well, what are we doing? We're trying to help provide purpose and meaning for someone who's having a hard time finding purpose and meaning. We're helping them find little purposes and little meanings. And, you know, the other thing is when you're actually visiting someone regularly. So let's say you say, I'm going to be able to see you every Thursday at 3 o'clock. Okay. Thursday at 3 o'clock. That's how you've timed it. That person who you're seeing every Thursday at 3 o'clock is probably looking forward to seeing you Thursday at 3 o'clock. You know, I got a story from this one woman she's a nice young woman, and when she first got married, before she had any children, she decided, oh, I have time on such and such a day, because she was working, etc. But she had time one day a week. She decided to go to the local nursing home and visit a couple people. And this one woman was sharing to her that she thought that maybe, you know, maybe MAID, euthanasia, was a good idea, is what she was saying to her. And the girl who was visiting her was saying, no, I think that's a terrible idea. And she says, well, why would that be? And she said, because I come to see you every week, and we play cards together, and we spend time together. If you were to be gone, I would miss you. You're important to me. And the woman just sort of thought, oh, okay, well, maybe you're right. Maybe MAID's not a good idea. But you know what I'm saying? That's what made the difference in this woman's life, that someone actually said, I care. Deidre just said good night. Very informative. Thank you very much, Deidre. We're going to go to Christine, and if there won't be any questions after that, we might shut it down early. But if there are, we'll take more questions.
I just wondered, I know when my grandmother was quite ill, and her memory wasn't doing so well in her old age. But she started to accuse the grandchildren of stealing and things like that. So when we're around vulnerable people and we're by ourselves, how do we protect ourselves from, because sometimes it does happen where you come into their home and they're not always thinking straight.
Well, that's what we talk about with dementia now, right? A lot of people have some dementia, and what they're saying is
How are we protected?
yeah, it's good not to be alone then. It's good to visit with a spouse, or if you're actually, let's say you're visiting someone and it's a church group exactly who you're representing, or you're going as example, because some of the ladies here, CWL, Catholic Women's League ladies, as an example, right? Then it's good to go with someone else, because if this person starts accusing you of something, well, it is true. Well, what are you going to say? You have no defense, because it's between you and them. And someone might say, yeah, I know she seems to be losing it, but it's not the point. That's the reality for that person. So you go with someone else, and you hope that doesn't happen. But, you know, you need to protect yourself too. I agree. And that's very important. So not being alone in those situations would be primary. Yeah. Yeah.
I also wanted to know about the advocacy training, if we can get on the list, and how you go about doing that.
Yeah, so the program's been written, and it's being published right now. And so when it's out, Kathy and I are going to look each other in the face and decide exactly when we're going to start doing advocacy training. It might not be till September, and then you're going to see an email coming out. You're now on the CCC email list. You might be on the EPC email list. You're going to get an email, and it's going to talk about, you know, opportunities for advocacy training and etc. Advocacy, as you know, is only a part of the full program we have here, but here I'm only talking about the importance of advocacy. We don't actually have a program per se, but we do have in here, as I say, the agreement that people can sign, etc., in this booklet. So you can actually do advocacy if you follow that sort of line. Nonetheless, it would be a shorter training program because of the fact that we're not going through all the issues that we'll be going through. We're going to be then just focus on the advocacy.
Yes, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
No.
Okay.
You can send emails to Kathy at any time if you have any questions at all. And if pertains to anything dealing with Alex, such as if you wanted to order the life protecting power of attorney for personal care and you didn't get my email address, then you can do it that way too. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. And it's actually 8:45. So I know for Louisa, that's only 5:45. But anyway, oh, Louisa put her hand up. So we better let her say something because she was so
Okay.
great last night.
Okay. To listen to this session or presentation, I was holding myself from crying, really. It's so hard to think about one day I'm going to be in a care home like those people who are suffering and abused, whether physically, medically, or any kind of abuse. I have a suggestion. Why don't we hire like a maid or a helper or a caregiver, and
Yep.
this caregiver would take care of us in our children's house? You know what I mean? Because I came from a culture that if we throw our parents or elderly, we throw them in a care home, this is shame.
Yeah.
This is shame.
So Louisa, I actually agree with you completely. And I've actually, believe it or not, I've written about these things several times, even though it's Euthanasia Prevention Coalition I represent. I've written about these things from the point of view of preventing euthanasia. And I do believe it's very important that we care for our own. And so I agree with you, Louisa. And I also believe that the government should wake up and smell the coffee. They talk about providing more care spaces, but to me, that doesn't make any sense. To me, the best thing they could be doing is providing opportunities for home care. It's, believe it or not, it's actually cheaper. Why is it cheaper? They're not investing in all these institutional buildings. Yes, it costs money, obviously, to send people around to give so many hours a day to people, etc. I understand that costs money, but they're paying people to work in those institutions also. So it's not like a situation where, oh, you know, it just makes far more sense. On top of it, the fact is that you know, for all these spaces they want to bring in, why don't they create all these special tax credits, etc., to help people to change their houses over a little bit? So let's say, I'll give you an example. Jean Eklund, who is one of the co-founders of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, she stayed in her home till the day she died. So when she got to the point where she couldn't climb the stairs anymore, she put in one of those stair climbers. Now, the stair climber wasn't cheap, I agree, but she didn't want to set up a bedroom on her main floor of her house. So the stair climber allowed her to still have her bedroom and go up and down the stairs by sitting on it, and up and down she'd go. And then when she needed more care, she was fortunate. She did have some family to help her, but they had someone come in providing a little more care. And she stayed in her home till the day she died, and it was the right thing to do. And she actually needed significant care. You know, Kathy actually knows who I'm talking about. She knew Jean very well also. Jean had in her later years, she had a lot of, how would you say, the, in her back, the, what do you call it?
Sciatic?
Yeah, well, she also had the breakdown, right, going on. So she came to a point at a certain point where she was in pain all the time. And she had to take some painkillers just to deal with that. But that's why at a certain point she couldn't walk anymore because the pain was too great. You can't walk, but you could sit in the stair climber and go up and down. And this is what she did. Now, to me, the government would be far further ahead to help people stay in their home than to build more spaces for nursing home care. They'd be miles ahead. Sorry. On top of it, people would be happier. They'd be better treated in their homes.
Yes.
Who's kidding who here? And I mentioned the lady across the street who my daughter used to always visit before she passed away. She passed away what? Soon after, like she was in her home until near the end of her life. At a certain point, just before she died, she did go into the hospital for a couple weeks, but because she had some health things happen. But other than that, she was in her home and she had a place in the community. People knew who she was, right? She
Mhm.
had an identity. She wasn't just a number. Oh, that's room 13 over there. No, she had an identity, a purpose, meaning. My wife always says she's going to die in our house. We're not leaving. It's not happening. When she dies, she's going to die in her house. And I say, good for her. I think she's right. If that's how you're going to live, that's how you should live. Yeah.
Yeah,
It might not be easy though, Louisa.
it's not easy. No.
Anyway, the other thing is, I didn't want to talk about all these elder abuse things, Louisa. I don't want to talk about it, but we have to talk about it because it is a reality. If I don't talk about it, and then you find out that so and so is experiencing abuse, what am I supposed to do about that? Well, there aren't any easy answers, is there? But we have to know that yes, it does happen. We have to be aware, because if you ever bumped into it, you have to be willing to say something about it. We have no choice. You can't allow abuse to occur, right?
Mm,
And I think euthanasia is abuse. That's what I personally think, but you know,
of
the world thinks
course.
I'm crazy. Anyway, I think we're done for the night, and I'm really
Thank you
glad
so
that everyone
much.
joined us.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Sweden has a very interesting way of caring for their seniors, community care and personal care. There's actually some countries that have they don't use restraints at all. And there's quite a few articles, like when we were doing the program, my wife found all this literature about certain countries where they've actually outlawed the use of restraints in nursing homes. And I think that's the right idea also. I think it dehumanizes us, the use of restraints, but you know, that's my belief, and you know, do with it as you please. Thank you very much. Hopefully you guys can join us again sometime soon and support Compassionate Community Care.
Yes,
Well,
please do. Stay in touch, everyone. Thank you.
Allison, just send us an email. Yeah, we're shutting down now, so just send us an email, Allison, and we're happy to deal with anything you ask about. Thank you very much.
And we're on. See you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Good
Marianne.
night.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And we all, for any of you who are interested, we are on Facebook, so find us on there too. Thanks.